All right, now let's talk about when you want to take your vocal mix and transform the soundscape into a more psychedelic or shoegaze type of sound. So I got about 6 different mix tricks that I'm going to walk you through in this video, and you can pick and choose, or you can use all 6 perhaps in the same vocal mix. That might work for you as well. But I'm giving you these 6, and all of them have their own benefits and their own things that they bring to the table. But again, pick and choose. You might only want to use 1 or 3, or you might want to use 5 or 6, depending on the mix that you're working on. So let's dive into the first mix trick for psychedelic and shoegaze songs. And the first vocal mix trick that I want to talk about is it's a very simple idea, and it's just you often want to add a bit extra distortion. You want to, beyond what we did. So the song that we're using here is You and I, and this is the exact song that we use in the indie rock vocal mix walkthrough.
Started up on a hill, the story that would unfold and we chill.
And what's cool is I'm going to leave everything exactly the way it was coming out of the indie rock vocal mix walkthrough. So I'm going to retain everything, and then we are going to, on top of what we've already done, is where we are going to create this shoegaze psychedelic type of vocal effect. And I think this is really helpful because it helps you to understand that genres like indie rock or indie pop, or I would also put folk in there. There are certain genres where you often want your vocal mixes to sound almost vanilla. There's nothing crazy, there's nothing really extreme happening for those genres, but there's nothing wrong with vanilla. Vanilla ice cream is probably the best ice cream. But sometimes you do want an ice cream flavor that is a bit weird, that is just crazy on the palate. And this is the type of thing that we're doing. We're expanding beyond just vanilla ice cream, and we are trying and experimenting with some other flavors. And one of the ways that we do that is by just griming up the sound a bit more and distorting it a bit more. So let's go ahead and do that. So I pulled in Little Radiator. So I did do some testing, some messing around, because there are 6 different tricks that I ended up doing here. So I wanted to put in some work, that way this video doesn't go too long. And the plugin that I ended up using is Little Radiator. This is just a distortion plugin from Soundtoys, but if you've watched my videos, you know that I bounce around multiple different distortion plugins. Saturation Knob is one. It's a free one that I use all the time from Softtube. But in this case, I thought this one sounded pretty cool. So listen to what it sounds like without this distortion, and then I'll turn it on.
I remember when you fell, I crouched down to give you help, you were fine. Just a rock that caught you by surprise. That was the first time I held your small hand, nursed back to health, you and I.
Now, of course, we are adding a ton of volume. So what I like to do in this instance, when it does that and there's not an output volume knob on it to compensate for it, I'll just add a gain plugin to the chain where we can turn the volume up or down. And in this case, I just went about 10 dB cut on the overall volume. So now here's with the distortion added and with the volume turned down, so that our ears don't get too deceived here.
I remember when you fell, I crouched down to give you help, you were fine. Just a rock that caught you by surprise.
So there's without it, and there's with it again.
That was the first time I held.
So that is the first trick. We've already talked about distortion, so there's not really that much more that I would need to discuss here when it comes to distortion. Now, the next trick I want to talk about is really fun, and it has a very recognizable and cool sound, and it is the telephone EQ, or telephonic EQ curve. Now, the type of sound, so I'm just going to play it, that way you can hear it. So let me turn it off and then I'll turn it on.
Started up on a hill, the story that would unfold and we'd chill. Every night was the same, you and I. I remember when you fell,
I mean, that is transforming the sound. It is making a huge difference and it is giving us a telephonic like sound. It's the type of sound when you're on the phone with somebody, this is kind of what it sounds like. Not a whole lot of low end. We're doing a cut in the low range, not a whole lot of high end, and a whole lot in this range between like 1 and 2K. And so
Just a rock that caught you by surprise.
So I may be overdoing it just slightly, but I think that's helpful just for tutorial purposes here so that you can really hear what it sounds like.
That was the first time I held your small hand us back to health, you and I.
So I would say this is a good starting point for if you are trying to get more of a telephonic EQ curve on the vocal that you're mixing. Roll off the lows, roll off the highs, and then do a boost up around 1.5, 2K, especially in that range. That's where you get that honkiness to really pop through. And in this case, I started with the telephone preset inside of Studio One here, and I just adjusted it from there. And that's the sound that we got. So that's another just really cool trick for trying to escape from a vanilla vocal mix. And when you're trying to expand beyond that, EQ is such a great tool. And it just sounds cool. It's a lot of fun. Okay, so that is trick number 2. The third mix trick when you want a shoegazy, psychedelic type of vocal mix that you could try to add is a creepy sounding delay. So let's talk about a creepy delay, shall we? So on a return track over here, I already have this set up. All these green ones here are the new ones that I'm just talking about in this video. So the first green return track here is a delay plugin, and it sounds like this.
Felt the vibe, it was time to
Okay, first things first, I need to turn down the overall volume. Maybe I'll just turn down using Mix Tool here.
go inside. Went inside each other's minds, pulling out emotions, and you and I were talking endlessly during the night. You and I, not the same, let's give it.
So yeah, that's the delay effect, just something that is weird, that's kind of creepy, that has an otherworldly sound to it. And when I want that type of thing, I am a preset guy in general. I love to have a piece of software or a VST instrument that has good presets because then I can just explore and let the momentum and let my ears respond rather than being too technical and like, okay, how can I sound design my way to getting what I want? My starting point, my go-to is to simply use presets. And this, in this instance, is no different. I just browsed through all the presets inside of Valhalla Delay until I landed on one that I thought sounded kind of creepy, sounded weird, and gave me that effect that I was looking for. And this is what I ended up with.
On a hill, story that would unfold and we'd chill. Every night was the same, you and I.
So there it is. A little creepy delay can make such a difference. Let me actually turn it off for a second so we can hear without.
I remember when you fell. I crouched down to give you help. You were fine, just a rock that caught you by surprise.
We're slowly elevating this vocal mix beyond our normal earthly experience, right? And that is usually a good thing when you're going for anything psychedelic or shoegazy in nature. I don't know why I keep saying shoegazy, it just makes sense. So I'll probably keep saying that because it's actually fun to say. Anyway, so that is the third mix trick, the creepy delay. Now, there are a couple more mix tricks I want to talk about with reverbs and delays. However, before we get to that or to those, let me talk about this little phaser that is on this lead vocals bus here, on this lead vocal. And listen to what a little bit of phase can do on a vocal like this.
Started up on a hill, story that would unfold and we'd chill. Every night was the same, you and I remember when you fell. I crouched down to give you help, you were fine.
Okay, what do you notice about this phaser? Well, the first thing you might notice is it's not the most obvious phaser effect. But do you notice how it's almost as if the vocal just becomes a part of the surrounding instrumentation? It no longer stands out the way that it did without the phaser on it. Listen to that again. When I turn off the phaser, the vocal sounds a bit more separate from all the other tracks in this mix, right?
Just a rock that caught
And it's still a little too loud. So let me turn down the vocal a little bit.
you by surprise. That was the first time I
But
held
then
your small hand was back to hold you, and I felt the vibe. It was time go inside.
sure, there's a volume loss that is happening, and that might be most of it. I am open to the idea that my ears are just getting fooled here. But also what I'm hearing, and I also don't think that that necessarily matters here, because if the effect is positive, I don't really care if I was technically correct in my analysis of it. But do you again notice how this phaser creates almost it's like it's starting to blend in and mesh together with the instrumentation that surrounds it? And it feels like it's starting to become more one with the surrounding instruments and the sounds in this mix. And that is one of the cool things that a plugin like a phaser can do. Now, when you're using plugins like phasers, you really do need to be careful because it's so easy to just completely ruin it. And I'm going to keep that as it is. That way I don't lose any adjustments that I may have made after the preset. But let me add just a new instance of a phaser just to give you an example of ways that you can use a phaser and it really, really doesn't work, or it's just too much. Like this.
Started up on the hill. Story is for every chill. Every night was the same. You
Now that's kind of cool if you turn it way down. If you turn the mix knob all the way down,
and I remember when you fell. I crouched down to give you help. You were fine. Just a rock that caught you by surprise. That was the first time I held your small hand back to hold you, and I
so yeah, I actually stumbled on a phaser preset there that could kind of work if you turn the mix knob all the way down to like 10%. That is an interesting effect, right? But even in that case, I turn it all the way down to only a 10% mix. And so whenever you're messing with things like flangers and phasers and those modulation type of effects, you really do need to be careful, specifically if it's on the lead vocal or really anything that is up front in the mix. And you need to make sure that what you're adding is truly, you need to make sure that it is impacting the song positively. You don't want to add a phaser and then want it to work, and therefore you keep it on even if it doesn't work, okay? But a phaser is a nice little tool you can add to, again, kind of just help the vocal blend in with everything else so that it feels less like it's standing out. It's just a part of the song. So there you go. That is mix trick number 4. We got 2 more to go that I want to talk about, and mix trick number 5 is a slapback delay with modulation and reverb. So here is what that sounds like. Let me turn it on. Where are we at here? Here we go. Slap delay with modulation. Here's what it sounds like, and then we'll talk about it.
story that went on for every chill. Every night was the same. You and I remember when you fell. I crouched down to give you help. You were fine.
So it's just a pretty standard slapback delay on the bass level, although the delay time is a bit longer than the average. Often for slapback delays, I'll be closer to 100 milliseconds, but in this case, it sounded better to me to go closer to 170. And so you have more of a gap, a distance between when that lead vocal comes through and when the slapback delay sound comes through. And then I have a bit of feedback so that it gives us a slight springing effect, like a boing type of effect, and then mess with the low cut and the high cut so that we have some filtering out of the slap delay sound. And then I also turned on the diffusion inside of Valhalla Delay to give me some reverb. I could have also just added a reverb plugin since this is on a return track here, but since there is a reverb type of effect built into the delay plugin, I just turned that on and it sounded good to me. So here is again what that sounds like. Oh, and I forgot to mention the modulation that happens. So with this mode, it's in pitch mode. Now I did start this with a preset. I just bounced around some presets until I found something that was close to what I was looking for, and then I adjusted it from there. But you can see the pitch shift, so we can really make it we can really make it sound weird. So it's that detuning modulated effect as on top of the reverb that is coming in as well here with this diffusion, and then EQ with the high cut, low cut delay at around 170. So there you go. There's a slapback delay with some modulation and some reverb. Here's without it. Just a fun sound. It's kind of like the creepy delay. It's a little creepy. It's a little weird. But again, when you are talking about specific genres, genre really does make a huge difference when it comes to the decisions that you make as a mixer. And so that is one example of it. It's really weird sound, but hey, sometimes that type of sound works, especially if you're in a psychedelic or shoegaze type of vocal mix or song. So one more trick to go. Let's talk about a long plus short reverb layer. So this is just two different reverbs set up on two different return tracks. One is a longer reverb, the other is a short reverb. And so it's pretty self-explanatory. So let me just let's start with the long haul reverb here. Just a standard reverb. It's nice and long, and then it's tucked back a bit. Just to give us some extra space, and you can hear the decay time whenever I hit pause. And so it's creating almost this underlying ambience that is underneath the vocal mix at all times. And then the short reverb is Valhalla Vintage Verb once again, and it's just also a hall reverb, but just not quite as long. And then if I mute these, let's come over to the spark that we worked for so hard. It's completely lost, not in the dark. You and I. Not the same, let's give it a try for all time. It's all kind of starting to come together, right? We have hit, and notice how it wasn't one effect or one plugin that gave us the sound that we've landed on here. Like with most things and most qualities that you're aiming for, it's going to take a variety of angles, and it's going to take a formula it's just like when you're cooking, a little bit of salt, not too much, maybe a little bit of sugar, some other spices, kind of put it together. And depending on what the meal is, sure, you might favor salt more, or you might favor sugar more, or some other spices. But at the end of the day, it is probably going to be a bit more tedious than you would like it to be. And that's especially true when you're going for these types of otherworldly or bordering on otherworldly effects. You probably need to hit it from 4, 5, 6 different angles like we did here with, what did we start with? We started with some extra distortion. We then move to a telephonic EQ. We then move to a little bit of phaser, and then we have a slapback delay with modulation. We've got a creepy delay. We've got a long reverb and a short reverb. So, and then they're all working together. And in a second here, I'm gonna turn everything on one by one so we can hear that everything together and we can hear that chain of events build up from the start all the way to the end of the different tricks that we just talked about. Before I do that though, I just realized that I forgot to mention this. I do have a sidechain compressor on this short reverb here, or the short haul. It's not that short, but it's a 2-second haul reverb here. And it's the reason I called it short is because this one is really long. It's like 3.5 seconds. And there is a sidechain compressor on this just to help the sound duck out of the way a little bit. And now if I make it extreme, do you hear the reverb kind of bounce around a little bit? Now that's a bit extreme, so we don't want it that bad, but this can be a cool trick for when you want the reverb signal to kind of duck out of the way. This is what we're doing, is we are creating a ducking effect on this reverb, and we're connecting it to, using a sidechain option here inside of this stock compressor, linking it to the lead vocal, and it's listening to the lead vocal so that whenever there is signal coming through, since we've chained it to the lead vocal, it responds to the lead vocal, it activates this compressor, and because this compressor is on that reverb channel, it turns down the signal that is on the reverb channel, which is this Valhalla Vintage Verb sound. So that's why you're hearing that ducking whenever the lead vocal is performing. Now, it's a pretty subtle effect. You can go more extreme sometimes if you want, but it is one of those things that I like to sometimes add on a reverb, especially when I start to get into the more ambient type of mixes where the reverb starts to take over a little bit too much. And so there you go. Those are the 6 mix tricks for when you want a psychedelic or shoegazy type of vocal mix. Now, as I promised, I'm just going to turn on all the effects that we added one by one. All right, so let me turn off all these guys. Turn off all the sends here that we added. All right, so here's where we started.
Started up on a hill, story that would unfold and we'd chill. Every night was the same, you and I remember when you fell. I crouched down to give you help, you were fine. Just a rock that caught you by surprise. That was the first time I held your small hand back to help you and I felt the vibe, it was time to go inside. Went inside each other's minds, pulling out emotions at you and I. We're talking the sleeping the nights. You and I, not the same, let's give it a try for a while, turn back time. You and I, not the same, let's give it a try for a while, please don't hide. You and I.
All right, there you go, my friend. Those are 6 fun vocal mix tricks for when you want to go for a more otherworldly type of sound with your vocals. All right, thank you so much for watching. Let's move on to the next video.